Somewhere, right now, two people just received the exact same piece of harsh feedback. One of them hears it as proof of something permanent. I'm just not good at this. I never will be. The other hears the exact same words as information. This is what needs work next. Same sentence, same moment, two completely different futures, branching off from a single internal reaction that took less than a second to happen. This episode is about that split second, the invisible lens sitting behind almost every reaction you have to difficulty, failure, and feedback, and how to notice it's even there before deciding whether to trust what it's telling you. The lie about just fix your mindset. Fix your mindset has become one of those phrases repeated so often it stopped meaning anything specific, vague enough to sound wise, useless enough to actually change nothing for the person hearing it. Here is what that advice almost never explains. Mindset is not a mood you talk yourself into. It's not a matter of simply thinking positive or reciting affirmations until belief follows. It is something much more specific and much more mechanical than that. A set of underlying assumptions about whether ability and intelligence are fixed traits or capacities that develop through effort. Those two different underlying assumptions, operating quietly beneath almost every decision you make, produce dramatically different behavior, even when two people appear from the outside to want exactly the same things. What mindset actually is. Think of mindset as the lens a camera uses, not the picture itself. The same scene, photographed through two different lenses, produces two very different images, not because the scene changed, but because of what the lens let through and what it filtered out. Picture the same setback, a rejected job application, a failed attempt at a new skill, a difficult conversation that went badly. The event itself is identical for anyone it happens to. What differs entirely is the lens each person is looking through when they interpret what that event means about them and what to do next. This is why two people can have the same raw ability, the same opportunities, even the same setbacks, and end up in completely different places years later. The difference was rarely the event, it was the lens. The fixed mindset. The fixed mindset operates on a simple, deeply held assumption. Intelligence, talent, and ability are essentially fixed at birth or shaped early on. You either have it or you don't, and effort mostly just reveals which one is true. Picture someone who was told constantly growing up that they were the smart one. This sounds like a compliment, and in the moment, it is. But over time, it quietly plants something else. An identity built on being naturally good at things without needing to try hard. And a person who believes their worth is tied to being naturally good at things has, without realizing it, built an identity that struggling with something threatens directly. This person, faced with a difficult new challenge, often avoids it, not out of laziness, but out of a very real fear that struggling would prove the smart label was never true in the first place. The growth mindset. The growth mindset operates on a different core assumption. Abilities are starting points, not fixed ceilings. They develop through effort, strategy, and the input of other people over time. Picture someone raised with a very different kind of praise. Not, "You're so smart," but, "You worked really hard on that, and it shows." This person's identity was never tied to being naturally gifted. It was tied to effort itself, which is something they always have direct control over, regardless of the outcome on any given day. Why the fixed mindset feels safer. If the growth mindset produces better long-term outcomes, Why does the fixed mindset remain so common, even among genuinely capable people? Because, in the short term, it feels safer. Avoiding a challenge you might fail at protects a comfortable, untested belief. I probably would have succeeded if I'd really tried. This is the same protective mechanism discussed in an earlier episode of this series, about fear disguised as laziness. The fixed mindset is often just that same fear, wearing a slightly different disguise, this time about identity and intelligence rather than effort alone. The fixed mindset isn't a character flaw. It's a very understandable, very human strategy for avoiding the specific pain of finding out a comfortable belief about yourself might not be true. The cost of that short-term safety, though, compounds badly over a long enough timeline, because avoided challenges are also avoided growth, accumulating year after year into a much smaller life than the one that was actually available. The praise trap. Here is something almost no one warns parents, mentors, or managers about, and it applies just as much to how you talk to yourself as to how you talk to anyone else. Picture a child who completes a puzzle quickly and is told, "You're so smart." The next puzzle is harder and takes longer. Without meaning to, this child may now interpret the extra time and difficulty as evidence against the smart label, rather than as normal, expected friction on the way to solving something new. Now picture a different child, praised instead for the process. "You worked through that carefully. I can see you tried a few different approaches." This child, facing the same harder puzzle, has no identity at stake in how quickly it gets solved. The praise was never about being inherently gifted. It was about the effort itself, which remains available and intact regardless of how hard the next puzzle turns out to be. This same pattern applies directly to self-talk in adulthood. Praising yourself only for outcomes that came easily quietly reinforces a fixed mindset. Praising the effort and the strategy, regardless of outcome, reinforces the growth mindset instead. And this shift is available to you starting with the very next sentence you say to yourself. How the fixed mindset sabotages progress in real time. It's worth being specific about exactly how this plays out day to day, because the sabotage rarely looks dramatic. It looks like small, quiet avoidances that seem reasonable in isolation. Picture someone with a fixed mindset about public speaking, a belief formed early, maybe from one bad experience, that they're just not a natural speaker. Every opportunity to practice gets quietly declined, always for a reasonable sounding reason. Not enough time, not the right occasion, next time will be better. Years pass. The belief never gets tested, which means it never gets updated either. Because the only way to update "I'm not good at this" is through the very practice being avoided, specifically to protect that belief from being challenged. The fixed mindset, left unaddressed, becomes a closed loop. The belief prevents the practice, and the lack of practice becomes proof the belief was correct all along. The power of one small word. There is a specific linguistic shift, small enough to sound almost too simple, that reliably marks the difference between these two mindsets in daily language. The presence or absence of a single word. Yet. "I'm not good at this" is a closed statement. It describes a permanent condition with no obvious next step. "I'm not good at this yet" is an open one. It describes a temporary, current state with an implied path forward, even if that path isn't mapped out yet. Picture trying this directly the next time you catch yourself thinking or saying something fixed about your own ability. Simply adding "yet" to the end of the sentence, and noticing whether the feeling attached to it shifts even slightly. This is not a magic trick that resolves the underlying issue by itself, but it's a small, immediate signal to your own mind that the door isn't closed, which tends to make the next difficult attempt feel more possible than it did a sentence earlier. Failure as data, not as identity. Perhaps the single most useful reframe available in all of this. Failure, viewed through a growth mindset, is not a verdict on who you are. It's simply data about what didn't work this particular time, under these particular conditions. Picture someone who tries an approach to a problem, and it fails. The fixed mindset interpretation is immediate and personal. I failed, therefore I am someone who fails at this. The growth mindset interpretation is narrower and far more useful. This specific approach didn't work under these specific conditions. So what does that tell me about what to try next? The event is identical in both cases, but only one interpretation produces a next step. The other produces only a verdict, and verdicts, unlike data, don't tell you anything useful about what to actually do differently tomorrow. Mindset about other people. This entire framework doesn't only apply to how you see your own ability, it applies just as powerfully to how you see other people. And this version of a fixed mindset can quietly damage relationships in ways that are easy to miss. Picture someone in a long relationship who, after one serious argument, privately concludes, "This is just who they are, they'll never change." From that point forward, every future interaction gets filtered through that fixed conclusion. Small efforts at change go unnoticed or dismissed, because the belief that change is impossible has already been settled. A growth mindset view of other people doesn't mean tolerating harmful behavior indefinitely or pretending patterns don't exist. It means remaining willing to notice actual, demonstrated change when it happens, rather than having already decided permanently that a person is incapable of it. The alternative, treating people as fixed and unchangeable, tends to become a self-fulfilling loop in which people rarely feel any reason to keep trying because they've already been quietly written off regardless of what they do next. Rebuilding a growth mindset practically. Understanding the difference between these two mindsets intellectually is the easy part. Actually shifting a long-held fixed pattern requires specific, repeated practice, not a single realization. Picture building this the same way any other habit in this series gets built. Noticing in the moment when a fixed thought appears, "I'm just bad at this," and pausing long enough to actively reframe it before it settles in unchallenged. Not by pretending the difficulty doesn't exist, but by asking a different, more useful question. What specifically would need to change for this to go better next time? Done once, this barely registers. Done consistently, across weeks and months, it slowly retrains which lens gets reached for automatically, the same way any other repeated behavior eventually becomes the default one. The role of self-talk. Much of this entire mindset battle takes place in a conversation almost nobody else can hear. The private narration running constantly in your own head, commenting on everything you do. Picture two versions of the same internal reaction to a mistake. One version says, harshly, "You always mess this up." The other says, more precisely, "That specific part didn't work. Here's what to adjust." The first is a fixed mindset verdict disguised as self-criticism. The second is growth mindset feedback disguised as the exact same moment of noticing a mistake. Neither version denies that a mistake happened. The difference is entirely in whether the internal commentary treats it as evidence about a permanent identity or as specific, correctable information about one attempt. Over years, The version of this internal voice you default to quietly shapes which mindset actually governs your behavior, regardless of which one you'd claim to believe in if asked directly. When growth mindset becomes its own trap. It's worth a moment of honesty here, because this idea, taken too far, can curdle into something almost as unhelpful as the fixed mindset it was meant to replace. Picture someone who has absorbed everything is learnable with enough effort so thoroughly that they refuse to ever accept a genuine limit, a genuine loss, or a situation that truly isn't within their control, treating every setback as a personal failure of effort, rather than sometimes simply bad luck, unfair circumstances, or a limit worth respecting rather than fighting indefinitely. A mature growth mindset makes room for both things at once. Most abilities genuinely can be developed with the right effort and strategy, and at the same time, not every outcome is fully within your control, no matter how much effort gets applied. Refusing to ever accept the second half of that isn't growth mindset. It's a different kind of denial, wearing a more motivational sounding disguise. Mindset as practice, not personality. One final, important correction. Mindset is not a fixed personality trait you either have or don't, despite everything discussed in this episode possibly making it sound that way. Picture someone with a strong growth mindset in their career who nonetheless reacts with pure, fixed mindset panic the moment their child struggles in school. Or someone endlessly patient and open to feedback in one part of life and completely closed off and defensive in another. Almost everyone carries both mindsets simultaneously, applied unevenly across different areas of their life. More open in domains where they feel secure, more fixed and defensive in domains tied closely to old wounds or fragile identity. The goal was never to permanently become a growth mindset person in some final, completed sense. It's to notice, area by area, where the fixed lens has quietly taken over, and to keep choosing, deliberately, to look through the other one instead. The practice, not the moment. Like everything else explored throughout this series, mindset is never truly changed in one dramatic realization. It's built the same quiet way discipline, patience, forgiveness, and peace with loneliness are all built, through small, repeated choices that rarely feel significant in the moment they're made. The single word, yet, added to a harsh sentence about yourself. The mistake treated as data instead of verdict. The person given room to have actually changed instead of being permanently written off. The self-talk corrected, one internal comment at a time, from judgment toward useful feedback. None of it resolves the old lens permanently in one clean motion, but it accumulates, quietly, repeatedly, into someone who reaches, more and more often, for the lens that leaves room to keep growing, instead of the one that quietly decided, long ago, that the picture was already finished. That is the lens you didn't know you were looking through. Not because you chose it consciously in the first place, but because you can choose, starting now, to look through a different one,